Somehow we have made it through day 21 of the Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard defamation trial. Let's talk about it. Hey everyone, welcome to Legalbytes. If you're new here, my name is Alita. I'm a lawyer licensed in California and DC, and on this channel we explain the law one bite at a time. So today began with Amber Heard resting in her case in chief, immediately followed by Johnny Depp's team arguing for a motion to strike Amber Heard's counterclaims. Specifically, Ben Chu from the Depp legal team got up and argued that she has not met her burden of proving her counterclaims. Particularly, he focused on her anti-SLAPP claims and on the vicarious liability element of Amber Heard's defamation claim. Now, the vicarious liability element here that we're talking about is this idea that Adam Waldman's statements can be attributable to Johnny Depp. That's because as a default matter, what one person does wrong under the law is not necessarily something that you can hold someone else responsible for. That is the case as a default matter, except for under certain special relationships. Vicarious liability is really the buzzword that we're talking about here when we are talking about that kind of a special relationship. What's being alleged in this case is that because Adam Waldman was Johnny Depp's attorney at the time that he made the statements, there was an agent-principal kind of relationship, and that Johnny had a certain level of control over the kinds of things that Adam Waldman was saying, and that he benefited from those statements that Adam Waldman was making to the press about the litigation at hand. And honestly, going into these oral arguments in the courtroom, I think that these are probably the best arguments that I've ever seen for a motion to strike. Now, that said, the likelihood of winning on a motion to strike like this is generally speaking pretty low. And that's because the judge in general, in this case, and judges in general across the United States, usually do not like taking these kinds of decisions away from a jury. So in the end, if there is what is called a scintilla of evidence, basically meaning a teeny tiny fleck of a possibility that the jury could find by an inference or by circumstantial evidence in favor of the party that is putting those claims forward, in this case, in favor of Amber Heard, then the judge is going to allow that to go to the jury for them to make their decision. The whole question here was whether or not the counterclaims are so deficient in terms of their evidence that it would be improper for the jury to even hear the evidence and to even determine the basis of the claim in the end. So anyhow, it was basically expected that Judge Azcarate would deny the motion. And in the end, she did. And for precisely those reasons, she said that there was a scintilla of evidence and that a jury can find by inference that there is this agency principal relationship. The jury can use circumstantial evidence for that. And so therefore, they're able to use that circumstantial evidence and to find by an inference that Johnny probably did direct these statements by Adam Waldman, and that therefore there was vicarious liability. Now, does that mean that the jury will find that way? Absolutely not. The jury could look at the evidence and say, there's not enough evidence here to find for that conclusion. But this was just an opportunity for the Depp legal team to make that claim go away sooner than what Amber Heard's team would like. Anyhow, then we heard from our first witness from the day, and that was Walter Hamada, the president of Warner Brothers, through a video deposition. Basically, the testimony from Walter Hamada was pretty short, and he pretty much stated that the lawsuit at hand played no role in whether Amber Heard would be in Aquaman 2. He said that she was never let go from the movie and that she was never therefore brought back into the movie. What happened was that she had a contract that had what's called an option to either continue working with her or to not continue working with her for a particular price. And he said that the option in her contract was exercised by Warner Brothers, and that was what brought her in for a second project. Now, he also was asked about whether or not there were issues as to her chemistry between her and Jason Momoa during filming, and he did testify that there were issues in their chemistry and that the way in which they got around that was through quote-unquote movie magic, through the writing, through the editing, through other professionals involved in the production process. So all of that is to say that any kind of issues as to Amber Heard's pay for her role in Aquaman probably had less to do with her issues with the hoax claims and the statements that were made to the media by Adam Waldman, and more to do with the actual chemistry issues of her acting and her abilities as an actress, just according to the inferences based on that testimony. Next, we heard from Dr. David A. Goldberg. This is Johnny's hand surgeon who actually did the surgery on his hand at Cedars-Sinai Hospital in Los Angeles. He testified that he did surgery on his hand and that he placed a pin in Johnny's finger for about 11 to 12 days and that he treated the finger overall for several months. He also testified to the type of cast or the splint that was placed on Johnny's hand for quite a while, and particularly through one of the incidents that was alleged during this trial about particularly the stairs incident and the closet incident that involved the allegation that Johnny went up and wrecked Amber Heard's entire closet. Dr. Goldberg testified that there was a hard part to the cast or to the splint on Johnny's hand, and that the hard part was on the top and the bottom of the fingers, so to speak, top and bottom like this, and that on the sides, that the splint was essentially soft on the sides so that he could have some space for his fingers to expand over time and to help with the healing process. Now, when he was asked by Amber Heard's legal team as to whether or not he could possibly have destroyed Amber Heard's closet in the way that the pictures had suggested, he said, sure, he had another hand. I guess that was theoretically possible. Then he was asked if he could have possibly hit someone with that hand, and he said, not without injuring the cast. That was then followed up by a question from Johnny's legal team asking whether or not he ever saw that the cast was in fact injured or harmed. And he said that he couldn't actually remember that cast getting injured or harmed. And so therefore, the inference from that is that he probably did not in fact hit anyone, including Whitney or Amber, when he had that cast or splint on his hand. Anyway, then we heard from several expert witnesses that were intended to essentially debunk some of the expert witnesses that we saw on day 20. Those were Richard Marks, Mike Spindler, and Doug Banya. If you remember, all of these experts testified in Johnny Depp's case in chief, and so they were all brought back. They were all recalled so that they could opine on Amber Heard's experts' opinions that were brought up in her case in chief. More than anything, it seems that these three witnesses were brought in basically to expressly destroy the credibility or the testimony of Catherine Arnold, Amber Heard's expert who testified on day 20 as to Amber Heard's damages from a Hollywood kind of perspective. Honestly, in my opinion, they didn't actually even need to bring in any of these expert witnesses to destroy that, because I really think that her testimony was already sufficiently taken down in cross-examination. But it certainly didn't help to have additional expert professionals to come in and help out with that case as well. Anyhow, the biggest criticisms that they gave of her testimony was that she gave no methodology for her conclusions, she gave no data for her conclusions, and that she compared Amber Heard's trajectory to actors who really are not comparable. In my opinion, the most compelling witness of these three was probably Richard Marks, because of the fact that he was able to bring in so much experience in Hollywood in actually working on these kinds of transactions, that he really just seemed like he was the most compelling, just speaking from experience and speaking from very concrete terms in terms of how Hollywood works and how these sort of transactions work in practice. It just was very clear that he was speaking from experience, whereas Catherine Arnold seemed to be speaking from, I don't know, making conclusions and then basing her testimony off of those conclusions rather than basing her conclusions off of data and analysis. Now, although Doug Banya, our Q-score guy that we on the panel were actually quite critical of from his prior testimony, was not exactly the strongest witness in Johnny's case in chief, he actually had some decent testimony today in discussing Catherine Arnold and the other expert that he was there to testify on, Ron Schnell. As for Catherine Arnold's testimony, Doug Banya particularly compared the Q scores of these other actors that Amber was compared to and the Q scores of Amber, and he found that Amber was less known, less liked, and more disliked than the other actors, generally speaking. This, of course, again, goes right towards the idea that Amber Heard's trajectory can't really be compared to those of Jason Momoa, Ana de Armas, Gal Gadot, and Chris Pine, and the others. In addition, Doug Banya also responded to Ron Schnell's expert testimony regarding the Twitter hashtags. And one of the most clear things that Doug Banya was able to point out was that the spikes in the particular hashtags in question had no correlation to Adam Waldman's statements in the Sun articles. One of the things that probably could have made this even stronger is if Doug Banya could have testified to a different connection to all of these spikes. For example, leaks of audio and videotapes that happened over time throughout the course of this litigation coming out of Johnny Depp's legal team as to the body cam footage and Amber's audio saying, of her saying, "Tell the world, Johnny, tell the world. Let's see if the jury will believe you." Those kinds of things. If there is a correlation to those different leaks, to those various spikes as well, then that would have been an even more compelling narrative as to debunking this claim that Adam Waldman is somehow responsible for the hashtag campaigns. Anyhow, then we heard from actually a surprise rebuttal witness, and that was Morgan Knight, who is an innkeeper, or at least was at the time an innkeeper in Hicksville, California. So he was there to testify to the Hicksville incident where Amber allegedly cuddled up with another woman, and Johnny allegedly had the wrist incident where there were comments about "what if I break your wrist" kind of thing. Anyway, Mr. Knight was able to testify to having observed Amber Heard around the campfire with her friends, saying that she seemed to be having a good time, and he testified to having spoken with Johnny that evening as well. He said that he did not see Johnny being abusive in any way, and he did not see Johnny grab anyone's wrist in any kind of an aggressive way. However, he said that he did see Johnny become somewhat afraid of Amber at one point during the interaction, which he said stood out to him because of the fact that Johnny is quite a bit older than Amber. And so it just sort of stood out to him. And what he did say, which was a little bit actually impermissible according to the court. It did draw some objections, but he was able to place it in front of the jury that he said that some of his impressions came from his own impressions from having been in an abusive relationship himself. Anyhow, Mr. Knight testified that at one point there was an interaction between Amber and Johnny, and that the two of them went into one of the trailers for a period of time, and that when they came out, Johnny's demeanor had changed somewhat. He had become fairly quiet for the rest of the night, kind of hanging his head down. And then Mr. Knight testified that the next day, the only thing that needed to be repaired from that particular trailer was a pair of light fixtures, which cost around $65 to repair. This, of course, is in contradiction to Amber Heard's testimony about all of the gruesome things that happened supposedly in that trailer and all of the destruction that was supposed to have occurred as well. Now, because this was a surprise rebuttal witness, he was only recently found by Amber Heard. No, not by Amber Heard. Now, because this was kind of a surprise rebuttal witness, he was only recently found by Johnny Depp's legal team. He had not been deposed prior to this, which is permissible because he is brought in as a rebuttal witness. But now, because of all of that, he also was a little bit of a rough witness for both sides to kind of work with. It was not as smooth of a direct or cross-examination as one would have liked, but that is kind of the nature of these kinds of rebuttal witnesses that are sort of found in the wild during the trial itself. And I will say that considering the circumstances, both sides, both Camille on direct and Elaine Bredehoft on cross-examination, did actually a relatively decent job considering all of the circumstances involved. Now, I know that might come as a little bit of a shocker given how critical I have been of Elaine Bredehoft's performance throughout this trial, but I do want to say that I will give credit where credit is due. It's a tough job to go into a cross-examination where there have been no depositions, and so you can't really impeach in a way that you would like to impeach. So credit where credit is due. I think that she actually did a fairly decent job, all things considered. Now, of course, another thing that came up was this massive focus on that umbrella guy who has a YouTube channel, which has been growing quite a bit throughout the litigation of this case because of his focus on the case. but also throughout the actual trial of the case, because he's gotten quite a few shout outs, mostly due to the Amber Heard legal team. So anyhow, another shout out to Tug over there, who has been doing some incredible work throughout this trial and throughout the litigation as well. Anyhow, next we heard from Dr. Richard Shaw, who is a psychiatrist that was brought in to opine on Dr. Spiegel's testimony. Dr. Shaw talked about the Goldwater rule and why Dr. Spiegel's testimony was a bit of a problem under the Goldwater rule. He said that the Goldwater rule is essentially a rule that says that a psychiatrist offering a professional opinion on a public figure must follow appropriate methodology according to the American Psychiatric Association. Now, if you remember on day 20, Dr. Spiegel essentially said that the Goldwater rule doesn't apply to expert witnesses in trials, because if it did, no expert psychiatrist would ever really be able to testify with a professional opinion. Dr. Shaw today in day 21 Now, Dr. Shaw in day 21 said that that's not really true. An expert can, in fact, frame things in a way so that the jury understands that the expert is making disclosures that basically that they haven't actually had a chance to examine the party. And so they cannot form a concrete conclusion, but that based on such and such factors, it is possible that the party has XYZ condition. And honestly, if you are listening to the logic and the rationale behind what Dr. Shaw is saying, it does just sound like a much more trustworthy opinion that the jury could actually listen to. Anytime a professional is going a little bit too hard in their conclusions, a little bit too broad in their conclusions, it automatically feels a little bit less trustworthy. I don't know if that's just me as another professional or if other folks outside of psychiatry and outside of the legal industry would agree with that, but I don't know. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments down below. But anyway, Dr. Shaw basically said that Dr. Spiegel violated the Goldwater rule a number of times. For example, when he gave his conclusions and his reasoning on Johnny having narcissistic personality disorder. And Dr. Shaw also said that he had issues with the way in which Dr. Spiegel distinguished, or maybe didn't so much distinguish, between causation and correlation between risk factors for intimate partner violence and the actual occurrence of intimate partner violence as well. After that, we heard from Jennifer Howell, and this testimony was widely anticipated as a rebuttal to Whitney Henriquez's, Amber Heard's sister's, testimony about the whole stairs incident. Jennifer Howell testified through a video deposition, starting with the fact that she is the founder of Art of Elysium, an art charity company that Whitney actually worked for until 2015 as the art salon manager and director. One of the things that Jennifer testified to was that she never saw Johnny do drugs and alcohol, and she testified that she never saw Amber with any injuries. She also testified that Art of Elysium at one point received an anonymous donation of $250,000, and that she understood that donation to be from Elon Musk. Then Jennifer referred to an email that contained a letter that she wrote to Whitney, which she characterized as trying to get Whitney to wake up and tell the truth. And after affirming that Adam Waldman had nothing to do with writing that email, the deposition ended. So if you are unfamiliar with the contents of that letter, the contents of that email, this was a very confusing deposition to end up with, because it's really unclear as to what that letter says, what that letter means, except for this implication that Jennifer Howell is saying that Whitney is lying. If you are a juror who is new to new to Jennifer Howell and new to Whitney, that on its own is maybe not going to be enough to be compelling to them to understand why exactly they should not trust Whitney if they don't already if they don't already mistrust Whitney in the first place. It very much felt like there was more to the story. And so those of us on the panel didn't quite understand what we were supposed to get from Jennifer's video deposition here. And it was also not entirely clear if the letter that she referenced in the video deposition actually made its way into evidence. But given what we've kind of put together from previous video depositions, it might be. And if that letter is actually entered into evidence, the jury will be able to see that letter when they go into jury deliberations after the closing arguments. but I still would have preferred for them to be familiar with the actual contents of that letter before they go into the deliberations. As an attorney, it makes me uneasy to think that they might be going into deliberations disregarding that entirely or completely forgetting about that letter if it does, in fact, turn out to be important. Anyhow, then we heard from the very last witness of the day, and this was Candy Davidson Goldberg in another video deposition. She's a representative of the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles, or the CHLA, and she basically testified that Amber did not pay the $3.5 million to CHLA that we have heard that she had supposedly pledged to them or donated to them, according to Amber Heard's statements that she had made on a Dutch television show. Ms. Davidson Goldberg testified to a couple payments that were received on behalf of Amber Heard in the amount of $250,000, but it sounds like those probably didn't come from Amber Heard from what it sounded like. And she testified that there was no date arrangement made with Amber to pay a pledge to the CHLA, basically indicating that not only did Amber not pay or donate money to CHLA, she didn't even actually properly pledge the money to the CHLA either. So that was the last witness of the day. Then we got to hear a proffer of evidence by the Amber Heard legal team. So basically, a proffer of evidence is where the legal team stands up and goes through a bunch of pieces of evidence that did not make it into the trial and describes what the jury would have learned from that evidence if they could have seen it and why it was important. The whole purpose of the proffer of evidence is to put on the record an argument for why the evidence should have been admitted but was kept out by the judge. And the purpose of making the record is to preserve that issue for a potential appeal. It's not done in front of the jury, so for folks that were concerned about that, this is not something that would impact the jury in any way because they really shouldn't know that it's happening in the first place. And it doesn't necessarily mean that Amber Heard's team thinks that they're going to lose either. It's more a matter of course in litigation and to prepare for all possible contingencies in case they do lose and they want to preserve the possibility of appealing on this particular issue. Johnny's team will also have the same opportunity to do their own proffer of evidence at the end of their rebuttal testimony as well. Anyhow, so that is day 21. Did you see the testimony today? If so, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. Otherwise, I hope you found this interesting or at least informative. And if you did, I would love it if you could hit the like button. It does help us with the YouTube algorithm gods. And if you haven't done so already, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you can find out when the next video is uploaded. And so you can join us for day 22 of the Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard defamation trial, live streamed with legal commentary, myself and a panel of other lawyers, and often other professionals like Nurse Liz, Spidey from Behavioral Arts, Dr. Tracy, Dr. Honda, psychologists on other channels, and a bunch of other folks getting their professional opinions and all of their impressions along the way. If that is interesting to you, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and I'll see you in the next video.